I sat at my parents' dining room table during Sunday family dinner when my successful older brother Marcus publicly humiliated me in front of the entire extended family, including my 3 young children. Marcus declared me the family failure and told my 10-year-old daughter Sarah that her father would never amount to anything worthwhile. Sarah burst into tears while the whole family watched in stunned silence. I quietly comforted my sobbing daughter, my jaw clenched in controlled fury, knowing something my arrogant brother didn't know. Monday morning would change everything between us forever. Later that evening, I tucked my 3 children into their beds in our modest 2-bedroom apartment. Sarah's eyes were still red and puffy from crying at dinner. My 8-year-old son Jake tried to act tough, but I could see the confusion in his face. My youngest, 6-year-old Emma, kept asking why Uncle Marcus had been so mean to Daddy. Uncle Marcus was having a bad day, I told them, smoothing Sarah's hair back from her forehead. Sometimes adults say things they don't really mean when they're upset, but I knew better. Marcus had meant every cruel word. This wasn't the first time my older brother had belittled me in front of the family, but it was the first time he'd dragged my children into his twisted need to feel superior. After the kids were finally asleep, I sat in my small home office and opened my laptop. The familiar glow of the screen illuminated financial documents that told a very different story than what my family believed about my life. 3 years ago, everyone watched my tech startup crash and burn in spectacular fashion. They saw me lose my house, move into this small apartment, and take odd jobs to make ends meet. What they didn't know was that 2 weeks before the public collapse, I had quietly sold my startup's core technology patent to a major corporation for $8 million. $8 million that my family had no idea existed. I'd made the decision to live modestly and invest the money strategically while letting everyone believe I was struggling. Part of it was pride, I'll admit, but mostly, I wanted to see people's true characters when they thought I had nothing to offer them. Marcus ran a mid-sized contracting company called Pinnacle Construction Solutions. He'd built it up over 15 years, and it had made him comfortable, successful by most standards. But Marcus had always looked down on me, even before my startup failed. When we were kids, he was the athlete, the popular one, the son our parents were proud of at school events. I was the quiet one, the reader, the one who preferred building computers to playing football. The humiliation at dinner tonight was the final straw in years of condescension. But as I scrolled through my investment portfolio, one particular holding stood out among the rest. 18 months ago, I had made an investment that would soon become very relevant to my relationship with my dear brother. I owned 68% of Pinnacle Construction Solutions. Marcus had no idea who his silent partner really was. When his company had hit serious cash flow problems 18 months ago, he desperately sought outside investment. I'd approached through intermediaries, using a shell company called Riverside Holdings. Marcus never questioned the source of the money. He just gratefully accepted the $6 million injection that saved his business. My phone showed 3 missed calls from David Chen, Marcus's business partner, and the only person at Pinnacle who knew my real identity. I'd been waiting for this call. I dialed David back. Terry. David's voice was tense. We need to talk. Marcus has been running his mouth again about the anonymous investor. He's been telling people he can handle whoever this Riverside Holdings person is, that he'll put them in their place if they try to interfere with his company. I leaned back in my desk chair, a cold smile spreading across my face. Has he now? There's more. David continued. I've been documenting everything like you asked. The expense reports, the unauthorized salary increases, the suspicious vendor payments. Terry, your brother has been embezzling from the company. We're talking about serious money here. My fingers tightened around the phone. How much? Close to $200,000 over the past year. Maybe more. He's been sloppy about it, probably figuring the silent partner would never notice. I stared at my computer screen. looking at spreadsheets that showed Marcus taking excessive salaries, charging personal expenses to the company, even putting family members on payroll who'd never set foot in the office. My brother hadn't just been stealing from an anonymous investor. He'd been stealing from me, David. I want you to call an emergency shareholder meeting for Monday morning. 10 a.m. sharp. Should I tell Marcus who's coming? No, I said, my voice steady and calm. Let it be a surprise. I think it's time my brother learned exactly who owns his company. After I hung up, I sat in the quiet darkness of my apartment, listening to the soft sounds of my children sleeping in the next room. Sarah's tear-stained face flashed through my mind, along with Marcus's cruel words echoing in front of our entire extended family. Tomorrow, my brother would discover that the family failure he'd humiliated tonight was actually his boss, and that his boss had been watching every fraudulent transaction, every embezzled dollar, every lie he'd told about his business success. Justice, I realized, sometimes comes in the most unexpected packages. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Pacific Northwest weather that matched my somber mood. I dropped the kids off at school after Jennifer, my ex-wife, called to say she couldn't do the morning run. Sarah hugged me extra tight at the school entrance. "Daddy, are you really a failure like Uncle Marcus said?" she whispered. I knelt down to her level, looking directly into her worried brown eyes. "Sweetheart, success isn't always what it looks like on the outside. Sometimes the most important victories happen where nobody can see them." She nodded solemnly, not fully understanding but trusting me anyway. That trust strengthened my resolve for what lay ahead. Back home, I pulled out files I'd been keeping for 18 months. The story of how I became Marcus's secret business partner was one of patience, strategy, and a little bit of calculated revenge. It started when I noticed Pinnacle Construction's name in the legal notices section of the Seattle Times. The company was facing a lawsuit from a major client over delayed completion of a shopping center project. I did some digging and discovered Marcus was in serious financial trouble. Pinnacle owed nearly $4 million to various creditors, and the company's credit lines were maxed out. That's when I saw my opportunity. Using a combination of shell companies and legal intermediaries, I approached Pinnacle through business lawyers who specialized in distressed company investments. Marcus never knew the money was coming from his supposedly failed brother. He was too desperate and too proud to ask many questions about Riverside Holdings. The terms I offered were harsh but fair given the circumstances. $6 million in exchange for 68% ownership. Marcus could remain as CEO and operational manager. But all major decisions required approval from the majority shareholder. David Chen, who'd been Marcus's partner for 8 years, supported the deal because it was the only way to save the company and the jobs of their 43 employees. For 18 months, I'd been the silent majority owner of Pinnacle Construction, watching from the shadows as Marcus slowly destroyed what I'd helped save. David provided me with monthly reports, detailing every aspect of the company's operations. What I discovered made my stomach turn. Marcus had been systematically stealing from the company, almost from the moment the investment money arrived. He'd increased his own salary by 40% without board approval. He'd put his wife on payroll as a consultant despite her never doing any work for the company. He'd charged family vacations to the company credit card, claiming they were business trips. Worst of all, he'd been taking kickbacks from subcontractors, demanding under-the-table payments in exchange for awarding them lucrative contracts. The scheme was simple but effective. A subcontractor would submit a bid for $50,000. Marcus would approve it, but privately demand a $10,000 cash payment to ensure the contract went through. The subcontractor would inflate their bid to $60,000 to cover the kickback, and Pinnacle's investors would unknowingly pay the extra cost. My brother wasn't just a bully and a thief. He was stealing from his own company, which meant he was stealing from me. I gathered every piece of evidence David had provided over the months. Bank records, expense reports, email communications, copies of the fraudulent invoices. I had enough documentation to send Marcus to prison for 5 to 10 years if I chose to pursue criminal charges. My phone rang at 9:30. David's voice was nervous. "Terry." "He's already here." Marcus showed up early, and he's in a foul mood. He's been complaining all morning about demanding investors who don't understand the construction business. He said, and I quote, "Whoever this Riverside Holdings clown is, I'll put him in his place today." I smiled grimly as I straightened my tie in the hallway mirror. "Tell him the majority shareholder will be there in 15 minutes for the emergency meeting." Should I warn him about anything? Don't spoil the surprise, David. My brother has always underestimated me. Today, he's going to learn that some lessons come with a very high price. I grabbed my briefcase, filled with 18 months of evidence, legal documents, and a plan that would change everything between Marcus and me forever. As I walked to my car, I thought about Sarah's tear-stained face from last night and felt a cold determination settle over me. Marcus had called me the family failure in front of my children. In about 20 minutes, he was going to discover exactly what failure really looked like. Pinnacle Construction's offices occupied the second floor of a renovated warehouse building in the industrial district south of downtown Seattle. I'd been here once before, during Marcus's housewarming party 2 years ago when he'd proudly given family members tours of his empire. Back then, I'd been genuinely impressed by what my brother had built. Now, knowing how he'd corrupted it with theft and lies, the polished reception area felt like a facade, hiding something rotten. The young receptionist looked up from her desk as I entered, clearly not recognizing me. In my navy blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase, I probably looked like just another contractor or vendor. "Good morning," I said. "I'm here for the 10 o'clock shareholder meeting." "Of course," she replied, checking her appointment book. "Conference room B. Mr. Chen said to send you right in." I could hear Marcus's voice carrying down the hallway before I reached the conference room. He was holding court, as usual, his voice loud and confident. "The problem with these investment fund people," Marcus was saying, "is they think they understand construction just because they've got money to throw around. This Riverside Holdings character probably made his fortune in tech stocks or some other paper business. He has no idea what it takes to actually build something with your hands." I paused outside the conference room door, listening to my brother dismiss the very person who'd saved his company as some kind of amateur. Through the glass, I could see Marcus gesturing dramatically, while David Chen sat quietly, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "When he shows up today," Marcus continued, "I'm going to explain exactly how this business works and why his demands are unrealistic. These rich boys need to learn they can't just buy their way into industries they don't understand." I straightened my shoulders and opened the door. Marcus looked up, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion as I entered the conference room. David Chen went pale, knowing exactly what was about to happen. The company attorney, a thin man in his 50s named Robert Walsh, looked between Marcus and me with professional curiosity. "Terry?" Marcus frowned. "What are you doing here?" "I told you last week. I couldn't lend you money. I've got my own business problems to deal with." I set my briefcase on the polished conference table and took a seat at the head, directly across from my brother. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. For our entire lives, Marcus had positioned himself as the head of everything: family dinners, business discussions, even casual conversations. Today, the power dynamic was about to shift permanently. "I'm not here for a loan, Marcus," I said calmly, opening my briefcase. "I'm here for the emergency shareholder meeting." Marcus laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Very funny. Look, whatever game you're playing, I don't have time for it. I'm expecting an important investor any minute, and I need you to leave before he gets here. I pulled out a thick folder of documents and placed them on the table. The investor is already here, Marcus. The confusion on my brother's face deepened. What are you talking about? I slid the ownership documents across the polished wood surface. I'm the majority shareholder of Pinnacle Construction Solutions. I own 68% of this company. For a moment, the conference room was completely silent. Marcus stared at the legal documents as if they were written in a foreign language. Then he started laughing again, but this time the sound was forced, nervous. This is some kind of joke, right? You're broke, Terry. You lost everything when your little computer company went under. You're living in a 2-bedroom apartment and driving a 10-year-old Honda. Robert Walsh, the attorney, had been examining the documents I'd provided. He looked up, his expression grave. Mr. Stevens, these ownership papers are legitimate and legally binding. Riverside Holdings does indeed control 68% of Pinnacle Construction Solutions. The laughter died in Marcus's throat. That's impossible. Riverside Holdings is some investment fund from back east. Riverside Holdings is a shell company, I explained, my voice steady and calm. I established it 18 months ago when your business was facing bankruptcy. I'm the sole owner and operator. David Chen opened his own folder and began laying out financial records. Terry provided the $6 million investment that saved this company, Marcus. Without his money, Pinnacle would have folded completely. I watched my brother's face as the reality slowly sank in. His successful construction business, his comfortable lifestyle, his position of authority and respect in the family, it was all built on money from his supposedly failed little brother. This can't be happening, Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. You don't have that kind of money. You can't have that kind of money. I sold my startup's core technology patent for $8 million 2 weeks before the public collapse, I said. While everyone was watching the company fail, I was making sure my family's future was secure. Marcus's face went through a series of transformations. Disbelief, confusion, and finally, a dawning horror as he realized the full implications of what I was telling him. You've been spying on me, he said, his voice rising. You've been watching my business, my decisions, my life. I've been protecting my investment, I corrected. And what I've discovered is very disturbing. I opened my evidence folder and began placing documents on the table. Bank statements showing unauthorized salary increases. Expense reports for family vacations charged to the company. Payroll records listing Marcus's wife as a full-time employee, despite never setting foot in the office. You've been embezzling from this company since the day my money arrived, I said. Close to $200,000 in fraudulent expenses, kickback schemes, and outright theft. Marcus tried to stand up, his chair scraping against the floor. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can. I looked at David. Show him the subcontractor files. David reluctantly pulled out another folder, this one containing copies of email communications and financial records documenting Marcus's kickback scheme. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Marcus sank back into his chair, his face ashen. For the first time in our lives, my older brother looked small and defeated. What do you want? He asked, quietly. I leaned forward, my hands folded on the table. I want you to remember what you said to my daughter last night. You told her that her father would never amount to anything. You made her cry in front of our entire family. Marcus closed his eyes. Terry, I'm sorry. I was frustrated about work, and I took it out on you. I didn't mean to hurt Sarah. But you did mean it, I said. You've always believed I was less than you. Even when we were children, you found ways to make me feel small and worthless. Last night was just the latest example. The conference room fell silent again. Through the windows, I could see construction workers beginning their day at job sites across the industrial district. Honest people doing honest work, unlike the man sitting across from me. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked. I closed the evidence folder and looked directly into my brother's eyes. "Now, you have a choice to make." Marcus sat frozen in his chair as I laid out his options. The confident, dismissive man who'd walked into this meeting had been replaced by someone who looked genuinely frightened for the first time in his adult life. "Your first option," I said, my voice calm and businesslike, "is immediate resignation as CEO and president of Pinnacle Construction. You'll repay every dollar you've stolen through a structured payment plan that we'll work out with the attorneys. You'll sign a confession detailing your embezzlement, and you'll publicly acknowledge your wrongdoing." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but I held up my hand to stop him. "Your second option is that I file criminal charges against you by 5 o'clock this afternoon. Felony embezzlement, mail fraud, tax evasion, and breach of fiduciary duty. With the evidence we have, you'll likely face 5 to 10 years in federal prison." Robert Walsh, the company attorney, nodded gravely. "The documentation is quite comprehensive, Mr. Stevens. The prosecution would have a very strong case." Marcus looked desperately around the table, searching for some kind of lifeline. "David, you've known me for 8 years. Tell him this is all a misunderstanding." David Chen shook his head sadly. "Marcus, I've been documenting everything at Terry's request for the past 6 months. The kickback scheme alone is enough to destroy you. And that's not counting the personal expenses you've been charging to the company." "How long?" Marcus's voice was hoarse. "How long have you been working with him?" "Since Terry first approached the company for investment," David admitted. "He wanted someone inside who could monitor the situation and make sure his money was being used properly." I could see the betrayal hitting Marcus like a physical blow. His business partner, his closest ally in the company, had been reporting his activities to the brother he'd always looked down on. "You set me up," Marcus whispered. "This whole thing was a trap." "No," I replied firmly. "I gave you $6 million to save your company, and 43 jobs. You chose to steal from that investment. You chose to lie about your expenses. You chose to take kickbacks from subcontractors. Every criminal act you committed was your own decision." Marcus tried one more desperate gambit. "We're family, Terry. You can't destroy your own brother over money." The words hung in the air for a long moment. I thought about all the times Marcus had humiliated me growing up. The constant put-downs. The dismissive comments about my interests and abilities. The way he'd turned family gatherings into competitions that I could never win. "You made my daughter cry," I said quietly. "You told her, in front of our entire extended family, that her father would never amount to anything. You didn't just attack me, Marcus. You attacked my children." For the first time, Marcus seemed to understand the real scope of what he'd done. The embezzlement was a crime, but the public humiliation of my family was a violation that cut much deeper. "I can work under your management," Marcus pleaded. "I can stay on as a regular employee. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't file criminal charges." I shook my head. "Trust is like a piece of paper, Marcus. Once you crumple it up, you can try to smooth it out, but it's never quite the same again. How could I possibly trust you with anything after this?" David cleared his throat nervously. "Terry, what about the employees? What about the ongoing contracts?" It was a fair question. Pinnacle Construction had dozens of active projects and 43 people depending on their paychecks. Whatever happened between Marcus and me, I didn't want innocent people to suffer. "The company will continue operating," I said. "David, you'll take over as interim CEO while we search for a permanent replacement. We'll honor all existing contracts and maintain current employment levels. This is about accountability, not revenge." Marcus looked around the table one more time, grasping for any possible escape. What about Mom and Dad? What about the family? Are you going to tell them everything? I considered the question carefully. Our parents were in their 70s, and learning about Marcus's criminal behavior would devastate them. But they also deserved to know why their family dynamic was about to change dramatically. They're going to find out eventually, I said. When you resign from the company you built, when you can't afford the lifestyle you've been living, when the whole family learns that I'm not actually the failure you've been telling everyone I am. Marcus put his head in his hands. This is going to destroy everything. You destroyed everything, I corrected. I'm just making sure there are consequences. I opened my briefcase and pulled out the resignation documents that my attorney had prepared. You have until 5 o'clock to decide. Sign these papers and agree to the restitution plan, or I file criminal charges. Marcus took the documents with shaking hands. The papers represented the complete dismantling of the professional identity he'd built over 15 years. There's going to be a board meeting Wednesday afternoon to formalize the management change, David explained. The other minority shareholders need to be informed about what's happening. And the employees? Marcus asked weakly. Will be told that you're stepping down for personal reasons. I replied. What they learn beyond that depends on how cooperative you are with the transition. I stood up and collected my files. The meeting that Marcus had expected to dominate had become the complete reversal of our lifelong power dynamic. Security will escort you from the building, I said. My voice professional and final. You have until this evening to make your choice. As I reached the conference room door, Marcus called out one last time. Terry, please, don't tell Mom and Dad about the embezzlement. Let me find a way to explain the resignation without destroying their trust in me completely. I turned back to look at my brother, this man who had spent our entire lives making me feel inferior and worthless. Part of me wanted to show mercy, to find some way to protect him from the full consequences of his actions. But then I remembered Sarah's face last night. The way she'd looked when Uncle Marcus told her that her daddy would never amount to anything. They deserve to know the truth, I said, just like my children deserved better than what you gave them last night. I walked out of Pinnacle Construction Solutions as its majority owner, leaving behind a brother who was finally learning what real failure looked like. Tuesday evening, I called an emergency family meeting at my parents' house. The entire extended family gathered in the living room where so many of our childhood memories had been made. Mom bustled around serving coffee and her famous chocolate chip cookies, blissfully unaware that the family dynamic she'd known for decades was about to change forever. Sarah, Jake, and Emma sat close to me on the old leather couch, still confused about what had happened at Sunday dinner. Marcus arrived looking haggard and defeated, his usual confident swagger replaced by the posture of a man who knew his world was crumbling. Dad settled into his recliner, the same spot he'd occupied for family discussions since I was a child. Terry, you said this was urgent. What's going on? I took a deep breath, looking around at the faces of people who'd watched my supposed failure for the past 3 years. My sister Linda was there with her husband and 2 teenage kids. Uncle Frank and Aunt Carol had driven over from Tacoma. Even Grandma Rose, now 87 and sharp as ever, had insisted on being present. I want to start by addressing what happened at Sunday dinner, I said, my voice steady and clear. Marcus said some things that hurt my children, and they deserve an explanation. Sarah pressed closer to my side, and I felt her small hand slip into mine. Uncle Marcus told you that your daddy was a failure, that he'd never amount to anything. But Uncle Marcus didn't know the whole story about what happened after my company went out of business. I looked directly at Marcus, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. 3 years ago, everyone watched my tech startup collapse. What you didn't see was that 2 weeks before the public failure, I sold the company's core technology patent for $8 million. The room went completely silent. Mom's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. Dad leaned forward in his recliner, his eyebrows raised in surprise. $8 million, I repeated. I've been living modestly and investing that money strategically, while everyone believed I was struggling financially. Linda was the first to find her voice. Terry, why would you keep something like that secret? Because I wanted to see how people treated me when they thought I had nothing to offer, I said honestly. I learned a lot about the character of people around me. Grandma Rose, who'd always been the sharpest person in any room, studied my face carefully. And what did you learn, sweetheart? I learned that some family members were kind and supportive, even when they thought I was failing, I said, looking at my parents and sister, and I learned that others, like Marcus, used my apparent failure as an opportunity to feel superior and to humiliate me in front of my children. Marcus finally looked up, his face pale and drawn. Terry, please don't do this. Do what? Dad asked, sensing tension he didn't fully understand. I pulled out the Pinnacle Construction ownership documents. 18 months ago, Marcus's company was facing bankruptcy. I provided the investment money that saved Pinnacle Construction Solutions. I own 68% of the business. The revelation hit the family like a thunderbolt. Uncle Frank actually choked on his coffee. My sister's teenage kids stared back and forth between Marcus and me, as if watching a tennis match. That's impossible, Mom whispered. Marcus built that company from nothing. Marcus built it, I agreed. But when it was about to collapse, I'm the one who saved it. And in the process, I discovered some very disturbing things about how he's been running the business. David Chen had provided me with a simplified summary of Marcus's financial crimes, written in language that wouldn't require a business degree to understand. I pulled out the document and began reading. Over the past 18 months, Marcus has embezzled approximately $200,000 from Pinnacle Construction. He's charged personal vacations to the company credit card. He's put family members on payroll who never worked for the business. And he's been taking kickbacks from subcontractors in exchange for awarding them contracts. The family attorney I'd brought with me, Margaret Torres, opened her briefcase and pulled out copies of the evidence. These are federal crimes, she explained. Mail fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement carry potential prison sentences of 5 to 10 years. Marcus's wife, Jennifer, turned to stare at her husband in horror. Marcus, tell me this isn't true. Marcus couldn't meet her eyes. It's not as bad as it sounds, he said weakly. It's exactly as bad as it sounds, I replied. And it gets worse. The money you've been using to pay your mortgage, your car payments, your children's private school tuition. It's all stolen money. Jennifer went pale, realizing that their entire lifestyle had been built on embezzled funds. Their beautiful house in the suburbs, the luxury cars, the expensive vacations Marcus bragged about at family gatherings, all of it was purchased with money stolen from the company I owned. Sarah looked up at me with wide eyes. Daddy? Does this mean Uncle Marcus was wrong? You're not really a failure? I squeezed her hand gently. Uncle Marcus was very wrong, sweetheart. But more importantly, he was cruel. It's never okay to say mean things about someone, especially not in front of their children. Marcus finally spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm sorry to all of you. I was angry about work problems, and I took it out on your daddy. That was wrong of me. You weren't angry about work problems, I corrected. You were angry because you've always resented me, and you saw an opportunity to make yourself feel bigger by making me feel smaller. Dad cleared his throat, his voice heavy with disappointment. Marcus, is what Terry says true? Have you been stealing from your own company? Marcus nodded miserably. I didn't think anyone would notice. The company was making good money, and I figured a little extra here and there wouldn't hurt anything. A little extra? I pulled out the detailed financial records. $200,000 isn't a little extra, Marcus. It's systematic theft over 18 months. The room erupted in shocked whispers as family members tried to process what they were learning. Uncle Frank, who'd always praised Marcus's business success, looked stunned, and Carol kept shaking her head in disbelief. Mom started crying quietly. How did our family get to this point? How did we end up with one son lying about success and the other son hiding his success? It was Grandma Rose who provided the uncomfortable answer. We got here because we played favorites, she said, her voice sharp with decades of observation. We always treated Marcus like he was the golden child and Terry like he was the consolation prize. Marcus learned to expect special treatment, and Terry learned to expect disappointment. The truth of her words hung heavy in the room. For years, family gatherings had revolved around Marcus's accomplishments, while my interests and achievements were dismissed or ignored. That stops now, I said firmly. My children are not going to grow up in a family where some people are valued more than others based on appearances or assumptions. Marcus's oldest son, Tyler, who was 15 and old enough to understand the implications, spoke up for the first time. Dad, are you going to prison? The question that everyone had been afraid to ask was finally out in the open. Marcus looked at me with desperate eyes. That depends on your father, I said. He can resign from the company, agree to pay back everything he's stolen, and publicly acknowledge what he's done. Or I can file criminal charges and let the federal prosecutor make those decisions. What about the family? Jennifer asked. What about our house? The kids' schools? You'll have to make adjustments, I said honestly. The lifestyle you've been living was built on stolen money. That has to change. But then I looked at Marcus's children, who were staring at their father with a mixture of confusion and fear. They hadn't chosen any of this, and they didn't deserve to suffer for their father's crimes. I'm establishing a college fund for all the grandchildren, I announced. Every child in this family will have their education paid for, regardless of their parents' financial situation. Relief flooded Jennifer's face, followed quickly by guilt. Terry, after everything Marcus has done, why would you help our children? I looked at Sarah, Jake, and Emma, then at Tyler and his younger sister Madison, because they're family, and family means you protect the innocent, even when you're holding the guilty accountable. Marcus broke down completely, sobbing into his hands. I'm so sorry, he kept repeating. I'm so sorry for everything. Dad stood up slowly, his 75-year-old frame showing the weight of what he'd learned. Marcus, you're going to make this right. You're going to pay back every penny, and you're going to learn to live honestly again. Then he turned to me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. And Terry, I'm sorry we never saw how successful you really were. We should have been proud of you all along. Not just when we found out about the money. I don't need anyone to be proud of my bank account, I replied. I need family members who treat each other with respect and kindness, especially in front of the children. As the evening wound down, plans were made for Marcus's resignation from Pinnacle and his restitution payments. The family agreed to weekly counseling sessions to address the decades of dysfunction that had led to this crisis. But the most important moment came when Marcus knelt down in front of Sarah, Jake, and Emma. I was wrong to say those things about your daddy, he told them, his voice thick with genuine remorse. Your father is a good man, and he's been successful in ways that really matter. I hope someday you can forgive me for being so mean. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded solemnly. It's okay, Uncle Marcus. But don't be mean to people anymore, okay? As we prepared to leave, Mom pulled me aside. Terry, I'm proud of how you handled this. You could have destroyed Marcus completely, but you chose mercy instead. I looked back at my broken brother, who was talking quietly with his wife and children about the major changes coming to their lives. I chose justice. I corrected gently. Sometimes mercy and justice look exactly the same. 1 month later, the transformation was remarkable. I sat in what was now my office at Pinnacle Construction Solutions, reviewing the company's first monthly report under new management. David Chen had stepped up beautifully as interim CEO, and employee morale had improved dramatically once Marcus's toxic leadership style was removed. The company culture had shifted from fear-based micromanagement to collaborative problem-solving. Workers who'd been afraid to suggest improvements under Marcus's regime were now contributing innovative ideas that saved both time and money on active projects. But the real story wasn't happening in the boardroom. It was unfolding at job sites across the city, where Marcus Stevens was learning what honest work actually looked like. I pulled up to the Westfield Elementary School renovation project just before lunch break. The irony wasn't lost on me that my brother was now working construction at the same school where Sarah, Jake, and Emma were students. I found Marcus operating a jackhammer, breaking up old concrete in what would become the new library addition. His expensive suits had been replaced by work boots, jeans, and a hard hat. His soft office hands were now calloused and dirt-stained. "Terry," he said, shutting off the pneumatic tool when he saw me approaching. "I didn't expect to see you here. Site inspection," I replied, though we both knew I'd come to check on his progress. "How are you adjusting?" Marcus wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his gloved hand. "It's harder than I remembered," he admitted. I'd forgotten what it feels like to actually build something instead of just managing paperwork. The Marcus I'd known my entire life would never have admitted weakness or vulnerability. This version of my brother, humbled by consequences and honest work, was someone I was slowly learning to respect. "The crew treating you okay?" I asked. Marcus nodded toward a group of workers taking their lunch break in the shade of the building. "Better than I deserve. Honestly, when word got out that the former CEO was working regular construction, most of them expected me to act like I was above manual labor. And instead, I asked them to teach me how to do the job properly." Marcus said, "I spent 15 years running construction projects, but I never actually learned how to lay foundation or frame walls. I've been learning more in the past month than I did in the previous 5 years." I watched my brother for a moment, looking for signs of resentment or anger. Instead, I saw something I'd never seen before: genuine humility. "How are the kids handling the changes?" I asked. Marcus's expression grew somber. "Tyler's angry, obviously. He had to transfer from private school to public school, and his friends' parents treat him differently now that they know about my embezzlement. Madison's younger, so she's adjusting better. And Jennifer? She's processing," Marcus said carefully. 15 years of marriage, and she's learning that the man she thought she married was living a lie. She's staying for now, partly for the kids, and partly because she believes people can change. But I know I have a lot to prove." We walked together toward the construction trailer where the project manager was reviewing afternoon work assignments. I could see other workers watching us, probably wondering about the strange dynamic between the company owner and the newest laborer. "Marcus," I said as we reached the trailer steps, "I want you to know that what you're doing matters. The restitution payments, the honest work, the family therapy sessions, it all matters." My brother stopped and looked at me directly. It was a question he'd been carrying for weeks. Our parents had been devastated by the revelation of his crimes, but they'd also been working hard in family counseling to understand how decades of favoritism had contributed to the problem. "They already have," I told him, "but forgiveness doesn't erase consequences. You're going to be paying back that money for the next 8 years, and rebuilding trust is going to take even longer." Marcus nodded, accepting the reality of his situation. "What about you? Do you think we'll ever be real brothers again?" I considered the question carefully. For 35 years, our relationship had been defined by competition, resentment, and the toxic family dynamics that enabled both. The man standing in front of me, covered in concrete dust and genuinely asking for a second chance, was someone I barely recognized. "We're already closer to being real brothers than we've ever been," I said. "For the first time in our lives, you're being honest with me." The afternoon flew by as I toured other active projects. Pinnacle Construction had 8 major contracts running simultaneously, and under David's leadership, all of them were ahead of schedule and under budget. The company's reputation in the industry had actually improved since Marcus's departure, as clients appreciated the new transparency in communication and billing. That evening, I picked up Sarah from her after-school program at the elementary school where Marcus was working. She'd been excited all week about seeing Uncle Marcus operating real construction machines. "Daddy," she said as we drove home, "Uncle Marcus looked different today." "Different how?" I asked. "Smaller," she said thoughtfully. "But not sad smaller. Like normal person smaller." Out of the mouths of babes. My 10-year-old daughter had perfectly captured what it had taken me weeks to understand. Marcus wasn't diminished by honest work. He was finally the right size for his own life. Sunday dinner had resumed at my parents' house, but with dramatically different dynamics. The competitive edge was gone, replaced by genuine conversation about everyone's lives and challenges. Marcus talked about what he was learning at his construction job. I shared updates about Pinnacle's success under new management. The children played together, without the undercurrent of adult tension that had characterized previous gatherings. Most importantly, Sarah, Jake, and Emma were seeing their family function in healthy ways for the first time in their young lives. As November turned to December, an unexpected development emerged. Jennifer had started attending the same business college where she'd met Marcus 20 years earlier, working toward completing the degree she'd abandoned when they married. Marcus was not only supporting her education, but actively helping with childcare and homework so she could focus on her studies. I spent 15 years being financially dependent on someone who turned out to be stealing money, Jennifer told me during one family gathering. "I never want to be in that position again, regardless of what happens to our marriage." Marcus's transformation wasn't just about paying back stolen money or learning honest work. He was also learning to support his wife's independence and ambitions in ways he'd never done during their marriage. The most profound moment came during Christmas dinner, when Marcus stood up to address the entire extended family. "6 months ago, I thought success meant having more money and status than everyone around me," he said, his voice steady and sincere. "I thought being better than other people, especially my brother, was what mattered most in life." He looked directly at Sarah, Jake, and Emma. "I was so wrong about that. Success isn't about being better than other people. It's about being better than you used to be." Then he turned to me. "Terry, thank you for stopping me before I destroyed everything that actually mattered. Thank you for choosing justice over revenge. And for giving me the chance to become the person my children deserve as a father." As applause filled my parents' dining room, I realized that the family failure Marcus had accused me of being no longer existed. But neither did the arrogant, dishonest brother who'd made that accusation. We'd both become different people through this crisis. The difference was that my transformation had been a choice, while his had been forced by consequences. But perhaps that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the direction we were all headed now. 6 months after that devastating Sunday dinner, I sat in my home office in our new house, watching Sarah practice piano in the living room. The larger space meant each of my children had their own bedroom, and the backyard was big enough for Jake's soccer practice and Emma's elaborate fairy garden projects. But the real difference wasn't the house or the financial security. It was the peace that comes from living honestly, from having family relationships built on truth rather than assumptions and pretense. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts, Marcus's name appeared on the caller ID. "Hey, Terry." His voice carried a warmth that had been missing for decades. "I wanted to let you know that the Westfield Elementary project finished 2 weeks ahead of schedule. The principal said it was the smoothest construction project they've ever had at the school." "That's great news," I replied, genuinely proud of his accomplishment. "How does it feel to see a project through from foundation to completion?" "Different than I expected," Marcus admitted. "When I was running the company, I measured success by profit margins and deadlines. Actually building something with your hands gives you a completely different perspective on what we do." Marcus had been promoted to crew foreman after 4 months of proving himself as a reliable worker. More importantly, he'd gained the respect of men who'd initially been skeptical about the former CEO's commitment to honest labor. "I have news," Marcus continued. "Jennifer finished her business degree, and she's been offered a management position with Northwest Regional Bank. The salary is enough for us to start looking at our own small contracting business." "That's incredible," I said, meaning it. "What kind of business are you considering?" "Residential renovation, specializing in accessibility modifications for elderly and disabled homeowners," Marcus explained. "There's a real need in the community, and it would let us do work that actually helps people improve their lives." The transformation was complete. The brother who'd once stolen money to fund a luxury lifestyle was now planning a business focused on helping others. More than that, he was planning it as an equal partner with his wife, supporting her career growth instead of competing with it. "I'd like to discuss a possible partnership," Marcus said. "Nothing that would compromise your position at Pinnacle, but maybe some cross-referral opportunities. When we get commercial projects that are too big for us, we could refer them to Pinnacle. When you get residential accessibility requests, you could send them our way." It was a business proposal based on mutual respect and complementary strengths rather than competition or dominance. 6 months ago, I never would have imagined such a conversation with Marcus. "Send me your business plan," I said. "Let's see what kind of partnership makes sense." After we hung up, I reflected on the journey that had brought our family to this point. The confrontation that had started with humiliation and criminal charges had ultimately led to healing and genuine relationships. Sarah wandered into my office, carrying her latest art project, a drawing of our extended family at Christmas dinner. "Daddy, do you remember when Uncle Marcus said you were a failure?" she asked, settling into the reading chair beside my desk. "I remember," I replied. "Why are you thinking about that?" "Because I was talking to Madison yesterday, and she said her daddy told her that calling you a failure was the biggest mistake he ever made." I looked at my daughter's drawing, which showed all the adults sitting around the dinner table with genuine smiles instead of the forced expressions that had characterized family gatherings for years. "Why do you think Uncle Marcus said that?" I asked. Sarah considered the question with the seriousness that 10-year-olds bring to important matters. "I think he said it because he was scared that you might be better than him. So he tried to make you feel bad about yourself." The wisdom of children never ceased to amaze me. Sarah had understood the psychology behind Marcus's cruelty better than most adults would have. "And what do you think about that?" I asked. "I think being better than someone else isn't the point," she said, echoing the lesson she'd learned from watching our family heal. "The point is being good to people, especially the people you love." That evening, Jennifer called to thank me for considering the partnership with Marcus's new business. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "After everything he put you through, you could have just walked away and let us figure it out on our own." "But then who would I be?" I replied. "The person who uses power to hurt people, or the person who uses power to help people grow?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "You know, Marcus talks about that a lot now. He says the difference between the person he was and the person he wants to be comes down to how he uses whatever advantages he has." The conversation reminded me of a truth I'd learned through this entire experience. Real success isn't about accumulating wealth or status. It's about using whatever resources and abilities you have to create positive change in the lives of people around you. My decision to reveal Marcus's crimes could have been motivated by revenge. Instead, I'd chosen accountability with the possibility of redemption. The difference between those two approaches had determined whether our family would be destroyed by this crisis or strengthened by it. The following Sunday, as our extended family gathered for dinner, I looked around the table and saw something beautiful. Multiple generations learning to treat each other with respect and kindness. Marcus and Jennifer's children were thriving in public school, discovering that their worth wasn't tied to expensive possessions or exclusive institutions. My own children were growing up in a family environment where honesty was valued more than appearances. Most importantly, the adults were modeling healthy relationships for the next generation. No more favoritism, no more cruel competition, no more pretending that financial success was the only measure of a person's worth. As dessert was being served, Grandma Rose raised her coffee cup in a toast. To families that choose growth over grudges, she said, her voice strong despite her 87 years. And to the courage it takes to change patterns that have lasted too long. We all raised our cups, including Marcus, who 6 months earlier would have been too proud to participate in any moment that acknowledged his need for change. Later that evening, as I tucked Sarah into bed, she asked me one final question. "Daddy, do you think Uncle Marcus will ever call someone a failure again?" I considered her question carefully, thinking about the man my brother had become through months of honest work, family therapy, and genuine accountability for his actions. "I think Uncle Marcus learned that calling someone else a failure says more about your own fears than it does about them," I replied. "And I think he's learned that building people up feels much better than tearing them down." Sarah nodded sleepily. "Good," she said, "because everyone deserves to feel proud of who they are." As I turned off her bedroom light, I realized my daughter had articulated the most important lesson of our family's journey. Everyone deserves to feel valued and respected, regardless of their financial situation, career success, or social status. The real victory hadn't been proving Marcus wrong about my success. It had been creating a family environment where children could grow up believing in their own worth without having to diminish others. That's a legacy worth more than any business, empire, or investment portfolio. The story that began with cruelty and humiliation had ended with healing and hope. And sometimes, that transformation is the greatest success of all. What about your own family dynamics? Have you ever experienced a situation where someone's cruelty ultimately led to positive changes in your relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family challenges. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might need a reminder that true success comes from how we treat the people we love. Thank you for listening. And I hope your own family journey is filled with understanding, growth, and genuine respect for one another.